Week 2 begins our study of Beowulf. As you probably noted already, our first trimester in this course focuses on description and narration. So this week we're going to start working through a pretty comprehensive list of rhetorical terms. I've linked them to the resources page of the website. I'd like you to study the terms from alliteration to cacophony this week. Examples are there for each of them, though some of the examples are only in Latin, but don't worry about those. I'm not going to hold you responsible to know them. Once you feel you've mastered the list of terms, log on to www.classmarker.com and get into it using your login and password that I sent you a couple weeks ago. You'll find a quiz called Rhetorical Terms Alliteration to Cacophony in your account. There are 10 multiple choice questions asking you to identify examples or definitions of the terms you've studied. You can only take the quiz once, and your grade will automatically be shown to you and also sent to me. As I mentioned in my initial email, please be honest and don't consult any study materials while you're taking the quiz. So why have I chosen Beowulf as a narrative text? First of all, it's the earliest English epic. When we look at the Old English text, though, we don't think of it as anything close to ours because the words and even the alphabet are so different. I've added a link to the resources page that lets you see and listen to a man reading the Old English text aloud, to give you an idea of how different they are. If I had you in an actual classroom, I'd make you practice reading it aloud to one another, but no luck here. The poem was transcribed around the 10th century and came about as a result of the oral tradition, probably, which is the pattern of telling stories aloud in memory and passing them down to the next generation. There's a little bit of debate about this. There isn't actually one author that everyone knows to give credit to for the work. The storyteller, though, who told it would have been called the Shope, spelled S-C-O-P. The story is written in poetic verse, and each line has two incidences of alliteration, with a caesura or a pause in between them. Some other neat devices the poet uses are kennings, which are compound words meant to present bright images of common terms. For instance, in the poem he calls the sea the whale-road. These are often hyphenated. Another device you'll often see is litotes, understatement. For instance, when the poet's talking about the sword in one place, he says, "That was not useless to the warrior now." What he's really saying is that the sword is very necessary. I've asked you to read Heaney's translation, because it's beautiful and does a really good job of preserving many of these poetic features, even in translation. Some other aspects of Beowulf that are neat to note are the idea of comitatus. It's an Old English term that expresses the loyalty of a king to his people and vice versa. The duty of the people was to protect the king at all costs, and the king's duty was to give treasure to his people. Hence he's often called the ring giver, another kenning. Old English literature often focuses on the weregild, spelled W-E-R-G-I-L-D. The weregild means the man price, or the desire of a person or people to avenge the death of someone who's been killed. We'll see Grendel's mother looking for the weregild in the second half of this week's reading. If you haven't read any epic poetry before, it's important that you pay attention to enjambment while you read. That is, don't stop at the end of each line unless the punctuation leads you to do so. Force your eyes and mind to keep going on to the next line to get the full thought. If you find yourself getting lost in what's going on in the story, try reading the text out loud. That often helps me stay focused if the passage is a difficult one. Here's a basic plot of the story to get you started. After giving a long history of the Danes with many confusing names, we find them in Denmark in their mead hall, which is called Heorot. It's a feasting room. Mead for them was beer. And they're celebrating, only to be ravaged repeatedly by a monster named Grendel. No one in the land is sufficient to stop him until Beowulf the Geat arrives from Sweden to take on the task. Later in the story, he'll also battle Grendel's mother, and finally a dragon in his own land where he's going to be reigning as king. The discussion board prompts this week and next will ask you to reflect on a couple aspects of Beowulf's narrative. We'll take these initial thoughts and use them towards writing a paper describing Beowulf's narrative, so be thinking along those lines as you read. Best of luck to you as you write.